Scott Morrison is adamant he won't quit politics just yet, but has apologised to colleagues after it was revealed he secretly swore himself into 5 ministries during the pandemic. As reported, Josh Frydenberg, who was his loyal deputy and closest confidant at the time, didn't know, but Scott Morrison has privately apologised to him yesterday. He, among other colleagues, though, still don't understand why he undertook this action. They have had an explanation, but are still scratching their heads. Joining me live is the NDIS and Government Services Minister, Bill Shorten. Bill Shorten, we are going to talk to you about the NDIS, but first let's get a few things about Morrison out of the way. Would it be better if he wasn't in Parliament anymore, do you think?
That's ultimately a matter for the Liberal Party. At a personal level, I don't know what Mr Morrison thinks he achieves by hanging around. His credibility is shredded. His colleagues are on his side, much less the community or us on the side of Labor. His own colleagues are scathing. He is a very friendless soul, and all because he was running a secret state. I mean, if it was a good thing to do, why didn't he tell anyone? It is really extraordinary behaviour, and it reflects that he had no trust in his key ministers. And it's a really brutal assault on the foundations of our Westminster system with a cabinet government and a parliament which is sovereign and is aware of what the Prime Minister of the day is doing on these big matters.
Should the Governor-General have sought legal advice?
Well, I think primary responsibility rests with Mr Morrison and his cabinet, who are clearly not talking to each other. My focus is on Mr Morrison's actions. I think he's the primary actor in this matter.
Indeed. One final question on this. I think one of the most pervasive points of this whole saga is that during a pandemic, the Australian public had no choice but to trust government, who is giving itself all this extra power. It feels like he's used the cover of the pandemic to go further than he needed to.
Well, our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has done the right thing. He's being measured. He's waiting to see what the Solicitor General tells him on the 22nd of this month. But you have to ask yourself about this Prime Minister. When trust in politics is at an all-time low, the fact that he just made misjudgment after mistake after error, the man is not, he was not fit to be the Prime Minister. And, you know, frankly, the chickens have come home to roost. The question now is for Peter Dutton. Why is he keeping, saying nothing to see here? Why is the coalition keeping someone who clearly his legacy is one of secrecy, deception, not talking to the Australian people, not talking to the Parliament, not even talking to his own cabinet?
But you don't want to subvert democracy, right? I need to point out here at the moment, it's not Peter Dutton keeping him in Parliament, it's the people of Cook, right?
Well, the poor old people of Cook had to believe what Mr Morrison told them, so I don't hold the voters of Cook responsible. But the Liberal Party's got to question you, haven't they? I mean, you either endorse the behaviour by keeping him or you don't endorse it.
But when you say by keeping him, what do you actually expect Peter Dutton to do? Kick him out of the Liberal Party?
Well, do you really think that this standard of running a secret state is what political parties should endorse? No,
I'm not saying that, but if you're talking about, upholding the best tenets of democracy here, a unilateral decision in kicking him out of the party, kind of gets around democracy as well, if you know what I mean.
Well, what's the alternative? It is a matter for the Liberal Party, but what's the alternative? You can't turn around a corner in Canberra at the moment without a coalition MP complaining about Mr Morrison's conduct. But what are they going to do at the next party meeting? Say, oh, g'day, Scott, what did you do between when the Parliament was on the break? Oh, by the way, we happened to find out that you took 5 of the portfolios, you embroiled the Governor-General, you didn't tell us, and we didn't tell the Australian people or the Australian Parliament. When you're sworn in as a Cabinet Minister, that's a big deal. That's not a little deal. The other thing is, if it was such a good idea, why didn't he tell people?
It's a good question and an answer that he has proffered, which is not quite accepted by his colleagues, I can tell you. Now, let's get to your portfolio, because you've got one of the biggest jobs in government, as I see it. That is fixing the NDIS. Now, I don't think it's deeply flawed, but it certainly has problems. Is the task force you've announced the answer?
We definitely need to pull up the drawbridge or lock the back door of the scheme against crooks and opportunists. I warned the previous government as early as 2019, 2020, they had a problem not with disabled people getting onto the scheme, not with people with disabilities getting speech therapy or better wheelchairs. They had a problem in the scheme, but there was not a sufficient oversight of the invoices that are submitted from people alleging they've provided services to people with disabilities. They had they made it hard for people getting into the scheme, or they made it hard for people on the scheme cutting their packages. But by the same token, they were just slack and negligent and really eye off the ball when it came to people putting in dodgy invoices, service providers claiming they'd help people with disability when they haven't. I think we can get on top of it.
Sorry, if you are able to remove the fraud and the scumbags, does that make the NDIS sustainable?
I think the scheme is sustainable because every dollar we spend on a person with a disability is an investment and it generates economic activity. So I don't share quite the sense of crisis that some Conservative commentators do, but yes, I think we can get better value for money, better choice and control by weeding out the people who are siphoning money out of the scheme between the taxpayer and people with disability. But that won't fix all the issues. At the end of the day, what I've got to do is restore trust. Today in Parliament, I'm pleased to let you know and the viewers know that we've got 75, 80 people, many of whom are participants in the scheme, service providers, unions, advocates, talking about how we can improve employment opportunities for people in the scheme and also how we can draw people to work in disability, which is a rewarding career, but we need to be better at training people up and encouraging people to get involved and work in the care economy.
Are there still too many grey areas, perhaps, Mr. Shorten? I'm talking about overlaps with other schemes, insurance schemes, workers' compensation. Because of the NDIS, in many ways, is it a victim of its own success because these other schemes know that there's a NDIS that people can rely on?
Well, I think one of the challenges for the NDIS is we have to be careful that the scheme providing packages of individualised support for people with profound and severe disability to give them choice and control in their lives. We've got to be careful the NDIS doesn't become the only lifeboat in the ocean. The NDIS was not designed for all 4.5 million people with a disability in this country. It's meant to be complemented by services for people with lesser impairments outside the scheme. But I think there is a discussion we have to have with the states about lifting the game in terms of community mental health. There is a discussion we have to have with the states and the education system about making sure that kids with special needs that don't experience a sort of lottery about whether or not they get to a school that will support them or a school that won't. We do need to have a renewed effort to provide better social housing for people with disability without needing them to go on to the NDIS. So I think they're all matters that we need to address, and that's not something that can be done just within the scheme. But I do think we can clamp down on the waste. I do think we can clamp down on the rorts. I do think that we can reinvigorate the National Disability Insurance Agency. A lot of people are great who work there, but I think in recent years some of the senior leadership have been looking at the wrong solutions to try and make the scheme better.
One final question. We know the job summits are coming up. There's a lot of competing interests there. There's actually a lot more agreement between unions and business than I expected at this point of posturing before the job summit. But when it comes to migrant workers and the skills shortages, I mean, the NDIS would be seeing this as well. Do you support an influx of migrant workers to help support the scheme?
Certainly, I think that part of the solution to some of the challenges in Australia at the moment, it's only part of the solution, and we shouldn't rely on it lazily to solve all the problems, is to get back some of the visa workers we previously had here. But I think it's not just about migration and visa workers, although that is part of improving that is part of the solution. It's making sure that our TAFEs and our universities are giving opportunities to people, skilling them up for the jobs of the future. I think it's also a question in the case of my area of disability, working with my colleague Amanda Rishworth, the Social Services Minister. We're at full employment, and yet people with disability, the dial's not moving sufficiently for them to get opportunities in the workforce. So we've just got to encourage employers as part of a solution to understand that employing a person with a disability is a net plus. It's not a HR headache. In fact, people with disability have better attendance rates. They tend to change their jobs less frequently.
Yep.
So I think there is opportunity within Australia to look at people who've previously been, underestimated and give them an opportunity, along with making sure that we've got some proportion of people coming in from overseas to help with our work needs in this country.
Okay, Bill Shorten, we'll speak soon. Thanks so much.
Great, Laura. See you. Bye.